see we have the quorum, and I declare the meeting is open. My name is Senator Jean-Guy Dagenet from Montreal, Quebec, Deputy Chair of this committee. I replace Senator Dean. Senator Dean is not available today, and that's the opening for the standing Senate Committee of National Defense and Veterans Affairs. Now, before we begin, I wish to invite committee members participating in today's meeting to introduce themselves, starting with my left side.
Senator O, Ontario.
Welcome, Marty Deakin, Senator Ontario.
Dan Couture, Nova Scotia.
Peter Beam, Ontario.
Alina Gerba, Québec, replacing Senator Anderson.
Alors, merci à mes collègues. Et je vois que nous avons à la table le sénateur Couture.
Thank you, colleagues. I see we have at the table Senator Couture, Senator Youssef, and Senator Dusko. For those who are listening at a distance, we're continuing our study of Bill C21. Today, we will be hearing two panels. Government organizations, Indigenous government organizations and representatives. For our first panel, we're pleased to welcome by video conference from Nunavut Tunngavik Inc, Mr. Paul Irngaut, Vice President. So welcome. And we're ready to listen to your statement, which will be followed by a period of questions from the senators. And I remind you, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement. Mr. Irngaut, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, Honorable Chairperson and members. My name is Paul Irngaut. I'm the Vice President of Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated, commonly known as NTI. NTI represents Nunavut Inuit under the Nunavut Agreement. Our mandate is to ensure the constitutionally protected rights of Nunavut Inuit are respected and that governments live up to their responsibilities under the agreement. NTI is mission to advance the economic, social, and cultural well-being of Nunavut Inuit through the full implementation of the Nunavut Agreement. Nunavut Agreement is the largest treaty in Canada, covering 1/5 of Canada's landmass. Our concerns on Bill C21. In May, the government announced a revised amendment package of Bill C21 that largely preserved the problematic definition of assault-style firearms. That includes any semi-automatic manner with a detachable cartridge magazine that has a capability of 6 cartridges or more. The definition is overly broad and covers many semi-automatic rifles used for hunting or defense against predators in Nunavut. Inuit have treaty rights to hunt under the Nunavut Agreement. Hunting is a necessity for survival for a lot of Inuit in Nunavut. In isolated communities in Nunavut that are only connected to the south by air, store-bought food is extremely expensive and tends to have poor nutritional value. Hunting puts nutritious food on the table and is the essential means to feed our families and to maintain basic food security in Nunavut communities. In addition, the hunting environment in Nunavut is unique and isolated from search and rescue services other Canadians access. Semi-automatic rifles are effective and necessary as a humane method to quickly dispatch animals and as defense against polar bears, grizzly bears, and wolves. Inuit hunters are taught to prevent dangerous encounters and to scare away these predators. But that is not enough. It could mean life or death when one or more aggressive bears are breaking into your cabin or tent. You need to be able to scare them away quickly, and you might not have the time to reload. If this bill is passed with the ban on semi-automatic firearms, we will have to shoot to kill, resulting in increased fatalities to wildlife. The broad ban of many hunting rifles, with such negative impacts on our ability to exercise our treaty rights and then on our ability to feed and protect our families, is very concerning to us. There has not been sufficient consultations on the bill. It is our information that Inuit Tapari Kanatami, the National Inuit Organization, commonly known as ITK, had received a briefing of the most recent version of the bill shortly before it was tabled in May. However, neither NTI or ITK has been fully consulted on the language and impact of the bill. NTI believes that the definition of the assault style firearm is overly broad and would like to see deletion of the definition from the bill. Deleting the definition would not affect the government's initial objective or the integrity of the bill. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Irngaut, for your presentation. Monsieur Irngaut est avec nous pour une durée de 1 heure.
Mr. Irngaut is with us for 1 hour, so that every member would have the time to participate. I will limit every question, including the reply, to 4 minutes. So I'm asking you to ask concise questions, and same thing for the answers. We will start with Senator O.
Thank you, witnesses, Paul, that joining us today. And my question for you is, we have heard from several witnesses that one major problem with this bill is the one-size-fits-all approach for the entire country. And certainly, the country is so big, different parts, lifestyle is different from the others. And we have sports, we have people like you, your livelihood depends on gun up there for protection and for food. So my question to you is, do you feel that you are being listened to in the North? Paul?
Thank you. I had my speaker on mute so that I can listen to you better. Thank you for your question. We feel that adequate consultations have not taken place. As you know, the bill was introduced in May, and it went through the first and second reading, or was the third reading? I'm not sure the exact definition of that, but it went very, very quickly. So there was no time to consult Inuit. So we feel that this bill has not adequately consulted Inuit, even though under our agreement, which is a constitutionally protected agreement, Inuit are supposed to be consulted on anything that affects them. So we feel that we have not been adequately consulted on this. Thank you.
Paul, my second question. Are there any amendments you might suggest to this bill that might address some of your concerns or your group up north?
I would have to, like I said, we would have to look at this carefully. We are not so much against handguns, and we don't use handguns when we harvest. So we have no problem with that section. I would have to look at this more carefully, and I can provide a written response to you later on this.
Yes, please. You know that we'd like to listen to you about the semi-automatic long guns issue. Yeah.
Yes, as you know, we do use firearms, semi-automatic rifles, when we're hunting animals, whether they be whales or polar bears. We need those in order to secure our food source, especially when it comes to whales or walrus for that matter, and seals. So we need to do a quick reaction to secure our food source. So we need semi-automatic rifles to harvest in our territory. As you know, it's so much different up here, and everything is so expensive. As I indicated, store-bought food is so expensive that we need to harvest animals using any means that we can. And we need to have these rifles, semi-automatic rifles, not the assault rifles that you see on TV, like the what do you call it? The 15, not those kind of rifles, no. These are more hunting style rifles, long rifles that we need. Hope I did answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Irngaut.
30 minutes? No.
30 minutes?
Yeah.
No, 1 second and a half. Now, for the next question for Senator, we have Senator Youssef, Senator Dasco, and Senator Kutcher.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank Paul for taking the time to be with us here this morning. Very important for us to hear from you in regard to your concerns from the north, because the reality is very different than those of us here in the urban part of the country. I'm trying to, of course, appreciate the concerns that you're raising, and you're very specific about this, and you're saying that the ban is overly broad on semi-automatic. And in the context of that, I guess trying to appreciate the challenge that you see here. So I guess once the legislation, if it's passed, would, for new weapons on the market, anything that would have more than 5 capacity would be banned. And do you use weapons currently that's more than that has more than 5 rounds currently in regards to hunting and harvesting for your community?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. For harvesting birds like geese that we harvest in the springtime, there are some rifles that some hunters use that has more than 5 rounds. And for instance, if you don't have a shotgun, then you have to use semi-automatic rifles, whether they be 22 or 22 Magnum, or a little higher than that, like 223. But for harvesting whales or walrus or polar bear, I haven't seen any that use more than 5 rounds. So for those kind of animals, we don't use over 5 rounds per cartridge magazine. So, but for birds that come up seasonally, some do use more than 5 rounds. Yeah.
So I guess with if the legislation was to pass as is, you see this as a problem. So the restriction will be on anything over 5, and you think this will create a significant problem in regard to harvesting and hunting in the north?
Yes, like I indicated, when it comes to hunting birds, you need more than 5 rounds in the magazine, just so that you can secure food for your family. But when it comes to bigger animals, you take more time to harvest them. So this bill would be a problematic if it was passed because just the fact that I mentioned when you're hunting birds, and it can become problematic, even though the caliber might be smaller, not like the big guns that we use sometimes. These are smaller rifles that have more than 5 in a round. So, yes, if this bill was to pass, then that would be problematic for some hunters. Yeah.
And of course, as you understand, this is in regard to the future. So those who currently own or use semi-automatic right now that exceeds that I guess capacity, that's not in dispute. It's about the future going forward that this will create a significant problem in the community.
Yes, it would, and it's very hard to it would, and it's very hard to get your firearm certificate, especially up here in the north, because if you look at the firearms officer, we don't have one in the territory, I don't believe. We used to, and we can't access training unless if it's private. So it's very hard for people to get those firearm certificates in order to purchase rifles or so I can see huge problems in the future.
Thank you so much,
that.
Mr.
Thanks.
Irngaut. And we continue with Senator Dasco.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Irngaut, for being here today. I just have one question, and that is from testimony from some other leaders of Indigenous communities. We've had expressed concerns about the yellow flag and red flag laws. I just wanted to confirm that you have no concerns about I meant the provisions in C21 with respect to the red flag and the yellow flag provisions, and also the authorization for licenses to be revoked in cases of domestic violence or criminal harassment. So I don't think you said anything like that in your opening remarks. I just wanted to confirm that you have no concerns with those. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. We do not have any concerns when it comes to domestic violence, and we have no issues with those provisions under the Act. But we don't want Inuit to be brushed like a broad stroke, because a lot of these are law-abiding hunters, and you're right. We don't condone any violence, domestic or otherwise, when it comes to using firearms. Sorry.
Thank you. That's really what I wanted to know. Just I wanted to confirm that you had no concerns about what's in the bill. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's what I wanted to ask. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irngaut, for being with us today. Very appreciated, and very good to hear your thoughts and concerns. My question will be slightly different. We know that suicide rates are sadly, much higher in Inuit populations, and particularly with men and boys.
Yep.
Do you know if any suicide prevention, early identification issues related to suicide are provided in gun safety training to members of your community?
No, they're not provided. as far as I know. I've taken a few gun courses myself, and suicide prevention was not provided during those training. I know our government has programs for suicide prevention, but it's very broad. But when it comes to means, and you're right, suicide happens a lot up here, but there's no training, as far as I know, when it comes to firearms.
Right, well, thanks for that.
In terms of preventing suicide.
Thank you for that. I just want to unpack it a little bit. I am somewhat familiar, though not as familiar as I should be, and I apologize, with the suicide prevention, some of the suicide prevention programs available in your area. Do you think it would be, and to my knowledge, they don't focus on gun safety. Do you think it would be worthwhile for those programs to actually ensure that they do focus on gun safety, things like storage and other aspects, and also having suicide prevention training or awareness embedded into the training programs that your community receives when they do get gun safety training?
As I indicated, thank you, Senator, for that question. As I indicated earlier, we don't have a lot of training available to us in the north. Like just the fact that we don't have a firearms officer in our territory. So training is very sporadic up here, and if you go to a smaller communities, it's non-existent. So it's very hard to get these programs in place, but definitely suicide prevention should be at least part of that training for sure. I totally agree with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Merci, Sénateur Couture.
Thank you, Senator Couture.
And Sénatrice Gerba.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, to the witness, you have noted how important semi-automatic rifles are for your way of life. That it may, as a matter of fact, be a matter of life or death for hunters in the north. The government has said it will use the regulatory process to further define what the term assault rifle means. So through regulation, they will pick and choose guns to be banned as they did in 2020. So since you were not at all consulted on this legislation before it was introduced, can you tell me how confident you are that you will be, in fact, consulted at all as the regulations are drafted? Does that concern you at all, that you weren't consulted and that you may not be consulted?
I'm very concerned because, as you know, consultation up here can be very expensive. Even though under our agreement, we have to be consulted when it comes to issues that affect Inuit. So I really don't have a lot of confidence if it's passed very quickly, as we've seen in the past. And just to elaborate a little bit more, just a few years ago, 2 people from Mohawk died when they were attacked by polar bear. And just last summer, 2 teenagers were very lucky that they managed to shoot the bear when it came into their tent. So that's a reality that we have up here. And we need to be consulted on this firearm act, just so that people are aware and can voice their concerns. Even though I'm voicing my concerns, there are people out there that really need to hear this and have confidence in this act.
Well, thank you very much for that. I've spent a good part of my life in many of your northern communities, and I've seen firsthand the movement of polar bears, and thankfully haven't been in a position where I needed a gun to defend myself, but certainly appreciate that, and would hope that the government would take a bit of a different approach. When the minister was in front before our committee, of course, he said they had consulted. As a matter of fact, he almost said that he didn't know of anybody that was opposed to this legislation, and I'm assuming you would not be considered as part of one of those groups who are not opposed to the legislation.
No. There's some. I thank you, Senator, for that question. There are some provisions in the Act that we are not opposed to, but the broad definition of some of the assault rifles is quite concerning to us, and that's why I think we asked that that definition be deleted in the Act, because it affects a lot of the Inuit up here, and in order to protect life and property, we have that right under our claim. So we need to be able to exercise that right to protect ourselves. So
very much, and
that's
thank you,
why I
Chair.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Irngaut. Now we have Senatrice Gerba.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witness for coming to speak to us. Section 70.3 mentions that the Chief Firearms Officer can authorize a conditional permit according to certain conditions, such as requiring a weapon for hunting and for one's needs. So this Chief Firearms is in of one territory is in Alberta, the one for Nunavut is in Yukon, and another one in BC. Given that the territories don't often have their own Chief Firearms Officer on their territory, I would like to know whether that is a problem for you. And what is the capacity of the Chief Firearms Officer to determine whether to issue a permit or not?
Question. As you know, as I indicated, we don't have a firearm officer in our territory. So even getting a temporary permit to use the firearm is out of the question up here, because first of all, you need to be trained for safety reasons when you need your firearm certificate. So even getting that is a problem. So getting trained in smaller communities is non-existent, because we have RCMP offices in our communities, but they're so busy. Maybe they will take upon themselves to do the training, but a recognized firearms officer, we need that in our territory, and we don't have that access right now. Thank you.
Merci, Senatrice Gerba. For next question, we have Senator Deacon, followed by Senator Beam.
Thank you, and thank you for being here with us today. Greatly appreciate it. And you're talking to a committee, many of whom had the privilege of visiting sections of the Arctic in the past year. So we're especially grateful. I want to ask you something around prior testimony that we heard last week. The corrections investigator of Canada, Dr. Zinger, released his annual report, which found that 32% of all federal inmates in Canada and 50% of the women are Indigenous, compared to 25% 10 years ago. This is clearly a serious issue that we all care about, that has to be tackled probably from many different angles. As far as this bill is concerned, is there a worry that Indigenous hunters will be targeted by new restrictions more so than the general population?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. The government has to understand that we're a law-abiding citizens, and we have been using firearms for quite a long time. And we're a small population, and we're trying our best to secure food security in our territory for our families. So this bill, if it's passed the way it is, it will target hunters in our territory, and that's a concern for us. Mm-hmm. So, and you're right. Majority of the inmates are Aboriginal, and we have no issues with the bill when it comes to domestic violence. We have no issues with that. It's just that the definition of some of the assault rifles may target our hunters. So I agree with you that it might target our hunters. Sorry, English is my second language, so I'm trying to figure out the definition. What you said, I think they might be targeted. You're right. Thanks.
You're doing a great job. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Beam. Now, pardon me, Senator Beam is for you. Thank you, Senator Deacons, and followed by Senator Boisvenu.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice President Irngaut, for being a witness today. I wanted to follow up on questions that have been asked earlier with respect to your expectation that your community would be involved in the regulatory phase. So as the regulations are developed after this bill passes in whatever form, would you be looking at being deeply involved, given that some of the solutions and regulations might have to be customized or bespoke for your community? And would you also be thinking of some informal arrangements such as which exist today in terms of voluntary relinquishment of firearms in cases where there had been instances of domestic violence, but then also receiving the firearms again for hunting purposes? Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Senator. When we look at this, we can definitely help to some extent how we can. I mean, we would have to look at this thoroughly, and if it's passed, we would have to look at it very carefully. But for your question, we are willing to help our hunters, and we're willing to explain to our hunters what this bill means to them. When it comes to domestic violence, we have absolutely no issue with the bill when it comes to domestic violence. As for accessing firearms to do hunting, if you committed those crimes, that's something that we would really have to look into, because violence in our communities are quite common, and it's not good when it comes to firearms that are involved. So we would have to really look at that provision of the bill. I know Inuit have the right to harvest for food, but we would definitely have to look at that carefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Senator Beam. Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I apologize for my lateness. I had an urgent question to deal with. I would like to thank our witness for being here today. The minister declared when he appeared before the committee, I will quote it, that people who do sports, people who use weapons in northern and indigenous communities are not targeted or included in these measures that we're trying to include. So my question is, do you agree that this bill will have no effect on indigenous people?
Senator, for that. It will have effect on us, the way it's written, because most of the hunters use firearms that are semi-automatic, and the definition of those are concerning for us. So, of course, it will have an effect on Inuit harvesters if it's passed. So, that's definitely all I can say at this time. Thanks.
Mon autre question.
My other question, a lot of witnesses told us that this bill did not distinguish between the North and the South, between rural areas and urban areas. According to you, should this bill have been decided in two ways, to take into account people who live in remote regions where hunting is a means of subsistence and also a cultural tradition in relationship to the South? Should this bill have made a distinction between Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities?
Question? Yes, it should have made that distinction. As you know, it's very different up here than even rural Canada, southern Canada. The way we harvest, it's a daily life for a lot of these hunters. It's a daily occurrence where hunting is happening every day. As we speak now, it's happening, and that's to provide food for their families. I mean, it's so easy for a non-Indigenous person living in the South to go, oh, I think I'll go have a hamburger. We can go to the restaurant. In smaller communities, we don't have that. So it's very hard for Inuit hunters to provide food that are nutritious. And for some hunters, it's very hard to even find the right rifles to harvest because it's so difficult to get training and also difficult to get FACs in some communities. So, yeah, I just want to point out that it's so different up here, and I'm sure you get that. Thanks.
Il vous reste 10 secondes, sénateur.
You have 10 more seconds. So last brief question. Do Indigenous people in the North, should they have been excluded from this bill, from the application of this bill?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. We're Canadians. We're law-abiding Canadians. And we try and follow the law. And some of the provisions in the law we're not against. I don't know if Inuit should be excluded from this bill. That's something that I would have to really look into and give you a written response. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Sénateur Boisvenu. Nous arrivons à la conclusion de notre...
Thank you, Senator Boisvenu. We're reaching the conclusion of our first round. Before going to the next round, I have two questions for you, Mr. Irngaut. I have a follow-up to your answer to Senator Dasko's question. One of the goals of C21 is to better protect women against domestic violence, which might take place with the use of a firearm. So I would like to know if there are women in your community who spoke about this topic.
For that question, Senator. Some women have spoken in terms of the experience that they've gone through. When it comes to domestic violence, we totally don't. What's the word? We don't want that happening in our communities. We don't want women to be assaulted in any way, using any means. So on this topic about domestic violence, we're totally in agreement with the bill. I can't emphasize enough that we do not want violence with our women in our territory, using it any means. Thank you.
Si mes collègues me le permettent, je vais avoir peut-être.
If my colleagues will permit me, I'll have one more question. Mr. Irngaut, you talked about the lack of consultation and also the lack of time necessary to evaluate the impact of the bill. Do you think we could add some amendments which would satisfy your community? If yes, what could they be? And I invite you to send them to us in a written format. That being said, we will move to the second round. We will start with Senator Youssef and then Senator Deakin.
Thank you, Chair, again, and I want to thank the witness again for his elaboration and again reminding us that the North is very different and the challenges that community face in the North, and more specifically that hunting is an integral part of life in the North. And it's not just about the culture, it's also about the basic necessity of life of having food and providing for one's family. But I want to come back on this question around the assault rifle provisions in the legislation, and just bear with me in the context. Using a .22 rimfire gun, which is one that's used in hunting, there are those that can hold more than 5 rounds, and there are 10 rounds and whatever. My understanding of the legislation is that those guns are not affected by provisions that will ban 5, because there are different type of rounds that's used in those type of guns. So recognizing the point you were making about hunting birds and other wildlife, I just want to be clear that those guns are not going to be impacted if this legislation is passed. So I'm not sure if you understand it, but I just wanted to double check to ensure that we're on the same page in regard to the statement that you've made.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I agree. I understand now that those provisions are there for the smaller firearms. I just want to emphasize that sometimes there are wolf hunters in our territory, and as you know, hunting wolf can happen very fast. So with the higher caliber rifles, you do need sometimes need more than 5 rounds. So I totally understand what you were saying. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for, reminding us. I did have the opportunity to visit the North. We were doing our study on Arctic security, and I very much appreciate the the welcome we receive in your community, but also the hospitality and the generosity people bestowed on us when we visit. So again, thank you so much for appearing before us today.
Merci, Sénateur Youssef. Donc, nous avons la sénatrice Deakin.
Thank you, Senator Youssef, Senator Deakin, and then Senator Richards.
And just following off on my colleague, continuing on with that, I think it's fantastic that we get a chance to listen to today and get greater perspective. I do hear the word lack of consultation, lack of collaboration, lack of listening. We hear it quite readily. And so and we would love to be in the same room as you today, but we're thankful that we can see you. But my question is, if you were to think about, this committee, you're getting lots of speakers and lots of witnesses. We care so much about the North. We need to demonstrate that. Who have we missed? Is there someone that you think in your professional services, in circles, that we should be listening to that perhaps we have not?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. As you know, in each community and under our claim, there's organizations, bodies in our claim that exist in each community. And these are hunters and trappers organizations. And they're the ones that administer and can create bylaws to the members where all beneficiaries of the Nunavut Agreement are under them. So they're the ones that really deal with everyday hunting in our territory. And they are the ones that can should be consulted on this. And all the chairs of those organizations have what we call the Regional Wildlife Organization, whether it be a Kirtaluk, Kiwalduk, or Kitumut. And they're the ones that hold annual general meetings annually. So that's an opportunity to inform them of any bills that may affect Inuit. Also, our organization, NTI, has a body that is called the Nunavut Inuit Wildlife Environment Advisory Committee, which I chair. So we advise our board of certain things that affect Inuit harvesting. So there's opportunities out there to inform Inuit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Merci, Sénatrice Deakin. Senator Richard.
Thank you, Senator Deakin. Senator Richards.
Thank you, sir, for being here today. I'm sorry I was late. I had another meeting. Sir, just a few minutes ago we spoke about rimfire rifles, but you certainly wouldn't want to hunt big game with rimfire rifles, would you? You wouldn't really be able to hunt a polar bear or defend yourself against a polar bear with a 22 rimfire very, very well. You would need a 30-06 or a 308 or some form of weapon that has the hitting power you would need. Isn't that right, sir?
That's totally correct. And also under the Wildlife Act, I do believe there's regulations that clearly states that you can't shoot a bear with certain caliber lower than, I think it's 243.
Yes.
Lower than that. So
of course there is, sir.
Yeah,
yes.
so.
Yes. Now I have a rifle acquisition card on me, which allows me to buy a rifle at a store, at a hunting store, or whatever. I'm wondering, do the Inuit need one of those to buy a rifle? Are they exempt from that? And if so, will they be exempt from that with this bill? I'm not sure how that works. Maybe you know, and maybe if you don't know, we could find out. But what do you think about that, sir?
Thank you for that question, Senator. As you know, we don't have firearms officers up here in our territory. And yes, you do need a firearm acquisition certificate to purchase firearms in our territory. But those certificates are only good for a number of years. I do believe it's 5 or maybe even 10 years. But after that, you have to renew them and you have to go through training again, I do believe. So for safety reasons. So yeah, we do need them in our territory in order to purchase firearms. Thank you.
Well, just who is the training given by, for instance, by rangers or RCMP, or is it given within the local community by the elders? I'm just wondering if it works the same as it worked in rural New Brunswick. That's all.
Thank you. It's given by a person that's trained to give these courses. It might. I would have to give you a written response to that, but I do believe some of the RCMP members provide training, but it's very sporadic. It doesn't happen all the time, especially in these smaller communities. So it's very hard to get the certificate that's required to purchase firearms, especially in rural or smaller communities in our territory.
That must be very difficult when you rely on hunting and weapons for your food and for your safety. Thank you very much, sir.
Merci, Senator Richards. Avant de conclure.
Thank you, Senator Richards. Before concluding, I have a final question. Can you tell us at what age the people in your community start using firearms, and do they have access right from the start to what we call assault-style rifles?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. From experience, I was trained at a very young age to hunt. I would start with just 22 for when I was like 10, 11, 12, with the supervision of my father. And they were very strict that you don't just play with guns. You have to be very aware of your surroundings. And that was taught to us at a very young age. Gun safety. Even if there's no ammunition in the gun, you don't point it at another person. No way. Sorry, excuse my language, but that's how it was, and that's how it is up here. Safety is very predominant in our culture when it comes to firearms. For the younger generation now, with videos, all these videos about and seeing other people being shot in news, it's very hard, I think, for the younger people, especially, and also for older people too, to really understand why it's happening. Because we were taught at a very young age to be very careful about our own firearms. Thank you.
Oui, Senator Platt, oui.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Platt.
Follow up to your question, Chair. So the Chair used the terminology assault-style rifle. Can you tell me, in your opinion, what is an assault-style rifle? Or do you have an opinion on that?
From my understanding, listening to the news, I know what an assault-style rifle is, which is what do you call AR-15 or something like that, with a big, huge clip that can hold more than 5 rounds for sure.
And in your community, you need some guns that have more than 5 rounds. I think you said that. You would not consider that an assault rifle. You would consider that a hunting rifle. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Because when you're hunting, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Maintenant, ceci nous amène à la fin.
This brings us to the end of our panel. I would like to thank Mr. Irngaut. We greatly appreciate your contribution, the time that you've taken to share your experience with us. Thank you again. We will now briefly suspend our meeting to permit the second panel to...
Alors, nous passons maintenant au deuxième panel.
So we will now begin the second panel. For those who are joining us live, this meeting is about Bill C21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, firearms. For the second panel, we're pleased to welcome representatives of the Mohawk Council of Kahnawà, Chief Jessica Lazare and Katie Spillane from Legal Services. So good day, welcome. We're ready to hear your opening statement, which will be followed by a question and answer period. Questions from the senators. And I remind you, dear colleagues, that you have 5 minutes for your opening statements. And then we follow that with a question period. Chief Lazare, the floor is yours.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Honorable Chairperson and members. So here we go. Hunting and harvesting practices are integral to our cultural identity and worldview as Ungwehunwe, as we call original people. We have hunted and harvested since time immemorial, and these practices are deeply ingrained in our way of being. As hunters and harvesters, we are glad to see some of the amendments that have been made to Bill C21 since the last time I was in attendance to the Standing Committee, but none of them address our concerns as Ungwehunwe explicitly. Today, I want to focus on the non-derogation clause set out in the very last provision of the bill. It offers no substantive...
Je vais vous demander de parler un petit peu moins vite pour le bénéfice de nos traducteurs. Alors, juste y aller avec un début.
I'd like to ask you to speak a bit more slowly for our interpreters. Just not as quickly.
Okay. Today, I want to focus on the non-derogation clause set out in the very last provision of the bill. It offers no substantive protection of our rights and may actually be harmful. Section 72.11 reads, the provisions enacted by this act are to be construed as upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples, recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, and not as abrogating or derogating from them. Let us be clear, Section 35 applies of its own force and effect, period. Consequently, while so-called non-derogation clauses like this may be useful reminders to officers on the ground, they offer no added legal protection for our hunters. At best, such clauses are like post-it notes pointing to the Constitution. Unfortunately, Section 72.11 is unlikely to even do that limited job. First, the clause is not set out in any of the primary or coordinating amendments and will not be reproduced in the relevant laws. Instead, this related provision will be tucked away in a drawer to collect dust. Parliament wrote the post-it note but forgot to attach it to the laws ordinary people see. Second, the wording will likely cause confusion. As drafted, Section 72.11 will apply only to the new provisions put in place by Bill C21. So a warden, a firearms officer, or a hunter who takes the time to read the bill and stumbles upon this post-it note could not be faulted for asking whether it means that Section 35 protections do not apply to the rest of the Firearms Act, which already has a non-derogation clause, or the Criminal Code. But of course, Section 35 does apply in its own force and effect. But if the point of the post-it note is to point to the Constitution, this clause could have the opposite effect, turning eyes the other way. Finally, if Bill S13 is adopted, and my colleague can explain why we oppose that bill during the question and answer period, Section 72.11 will be immediately abrogated. What a carve-out should look like. There should be better ways of recognizing Indigenous rights and ensuring they are protected. Take, for example, the sustenance exceptions to firearms prohibition orders. Its relevance to Indigenous hunters is clear, but case law reveals few cases of application. If Parliament were serious about protecting our rights, they would be tabling amendments that explicitly direct decision makers not to issue prohibition orders that impact Section 35 hunting, harvesting, and cultural rights. Or better yet, recognizing that this decision making belongs to Indigenous peoples themselves. In closing, it's clear that while concessions have been made in Bill C21 that will benefit Indigenous hunters, this is because they are benefiting all hunters, not just Indigenous hunters. Ultimately, it will be for the Kahnawà of Kahnawà, not for Canada, to decide how to keep our community safe, including determining what firearms we will and will not allow our people to carry. In the meantime, we urge you to address the underlying social problems that are the root cause of firearm violence and investigate genuine ways to remove barriers preventing Indigenous peoples from carrying out their lives in a sustainable, ceremonial, and generational way. Nyawa, Tony Iwanage, that's the words I have.
Merci beaucoup, Chef Lazare.
Thank you very much, Chief Lazare, for this presentation. Now we will move to questions. I'd like to remind the members that we have till 1:30 for this panel. Each question, including the answer, must be limited to 4 minutes. So I'll ask you to be concise and to identify to whom you're asking your question. And I will ask Chief Lazare to answer in a concise way. We will start with Senator Plett, and then Senator Oz, Senator Deakin, and Senator Boisvenu.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being here as witnesses to the two of you. Very much appreciated. One question that I have, and I've asked this question to many of the witnesses in one form or another, but when the minister appeared before our committee on October 23rd, I asked him about the assertion made in your letter to the former minister that, and I quote, "There is no carve-out in Bill C21 for the exercise of our inherent jurisdiction rights, nor was any consultation carried out to solicit our input." The minister stated that the bill is in fact respectful of Indigenous rights, and his deputy minister said this, and again I quote, "There were extensive consultations with Indigenous communities across the country when it was introduced the first time." That is the sort of sleight of hand that they engage in by referring to a previous bill rather than this one. So my question is this: just to be sure, did the government consult with you before this bill was introduced?
No.
Thank you. Are you aware of any extensive consultations held with Indigenous communities across the country before this specific Bill C21 was introduced?
No, we only had one meeting, and that wasn't necessarily an adequate consultation, so I wouldn't consider it consultation whatsoever.
Thank you. That seems to be very consistent with what other witnesses have said, and so I thank you for being explicit, and thank you for being here.
Sénateur O, suivi de la sénatrice Deakin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. My question to you is about the rights of Indigenous people. During this study of Bill C21, the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Security and Public Safety amended Bill C21 to clarify that the bill's provision would not abrogate or debrogate from the rights of the Indigenous people as affirmed in the Constitution Act 1982. What are some potential impacts on Bill C21 on Indigenous people? And would the potential impact differ across First Nation, Inuit, or Métis people? and recognizing that indigenous people reside in communities of different size and characteristics, would the potential impact differ between urban communities and rural communities?
So, of course, a lot of Indigenous peoples across Canada do use firearms for sustenance hunting and for harvesting. The one-size-fits-all approach is not the greatest approach. The way that the bill will be implemented will definitely not, I guess, complement any kind of non-derogation clauses, because in reality, there are non-derogation clauses that do exist, and our communities, our peoples are inflicted regardless of those clauses.
So are you guys get together, the First Nation, Inuit, and the Métis people? Are your groups get together and express concern about this bill C21, as you say, one size fits all?
Well, this is something that's similar to a lot of other bills that get tabled to Canada, so I can say with confidence that without even getting together to explicitly say that this bill in particular is not fitting for us because of the non-derogation clause, we have to ensure that we share the fact that we are not all the same. Despite having similar concerns and could be the same if not similar, that we are not all the same. We cannot be, I'm sorry, am I speaking clear enough for you?
Okay.
We cannot be regarded as all Indigenous, as all the same, because we have different needs, we have different capacities, we have different beliefs, different cultures, and different ways of being. So pan-Indigenous approaches do not work for legislation at all.
What would you be what would you be your most concerned amendment to this bill?
Currently, we're okay with the amendments. We're worried and more concerned about the implementation.
Thank you.
Senatrice Deacon.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here with us today. Greatly appreciated. Start off, we heard testimony on Tuesday, the concern about C21 infringing on treaty rights. And I'd like to dive deeper into that today if I could. As is written now, this bill does not ban hunting rifles. It will affect and impact handguns, and this new definition of prohibited firearms will only apply to firearms created with a new design after the coming into force of the amended definition. I realize that's a mouthful. So those guns owned today will remain untouched. So on the face of it, I'm challenged with the concept of the threat to hunting rights. But I'd like to really try to understand that from your point of view, and I hope you can assist me with this today. I'll open it up to either one of you.
Yeah, so hunting evolves over time. You can't limit our rights to hunt for the future generations. Firearms evolve, hunting evolves, migration patterns evolve, our hunting needs evolve. So the way that we hunted 10, 15, 20 years ago is not the same that we hunt now, and it will not be the same that we hunt 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Okay, thank you. And let me just slide a little bit to follow up on my colleague Senator O's questions to you. You've defined that, you've explained that, and you've also said, you know what, this bill, the amendments I can live with, but the implementation is our bigger concern. Could you just take a moment to expand on that a little, please? What concerns you about implementation the most?
So currently, we understand that over-policing is an issue for Indigenous communities, for First Nations communities. We also have concerns about meaningful consultation for regulations, because it will deeply affect how our people can carry themselves and carry their firearms. So we would like to have a closer look at what that looks like At current, there's no, let me try and find the word. I'm trying to be as concise as possible. Yeah, I had lost my train of thought with that one. Sorry. Can you repeat?
Well, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand your concerns as highest priority when it comes to the implementation piece.
Yeah. So we would really like to emphasize that we would like to be consulted on the implementation parts. As I said before, the over-policing aspect, and as was mentioned before, was the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in courts, in the justice system. It's very, very unfortunate and unfair. And there is obviously some racial discrimination, and all of those implementation pieces don't account for that. And when, like I mentioned also in my opening speech, is that there's a post-it note, non-derogation clause that does not impede on the rights. So when there's a post-it note, it's easy to disregard that at the boots on the ground kind of situation.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, do I have any more time?
You have a 30 second.
Thank
Or
you.
second round.
Thank you, sir.
We'll have second round. Sénateur Boisvenu, suivi des sénateurs Kutcher et Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. Merci beaucoup à notre témoin.
Thank you to our witnesses. Chief, my first question refers to a letter that you sent, or that your community council sent to the former Minister of Public Safety to emphasize the effects of C21 on Indigenous reserves. So we know that in Kahnawà there are the peacekeepers, and I quote part of your letter stating that Bill C21 will impose an unfair burden on the peacekeepers who are protecting our territories and will increase the risks of discrimination and over-policing for our co-citizens. Could you explain that comment in your letter?
For Kahnawà, it's very difficult to explain the unique circumstance that we are in. So we are in a First Nations community that cannot be, I guess, codified as either rural or urban. So we are right next to Montreal. We're about 15-20 minutes away from Montreal. We do have hunting on what we call the North Wall. And we also have a territory that's in the Laurentians called Jowerdodu. And that territory is mainly for our hunting and harvesting practices. But there are individuals from our community that do hunt elsewhere in other Indigenous communities, other First Nations communities. So when it comes to firearm safety, of course, the Kahnawà peacekeepers have jurisdiction over Kahnawà, but that jurisdiction unfortunately ends at the end of each of our entrances to our community and does not further extend to other Indigenous communities, does not further extend to being on the road with your firearms, and does not extend to being able to prohibit discrimination and the systemic racism that happens with outside police enforcement.
Ma deuxième question, c'est pour bien comprendre.
My second question is that I need to understand something that I may not have well understood, a statement in your presentation initially. Did you say that it's up to Kahnawà to determine which weapons will be used rather than Canada?
Important for the Canadian government to understand that we can govern ourselves.
Est-ce que cette affirmation-là...
Does that assertion...
I'm sorry.
Ah oui, excusez-moi, continuez si vous n'avez pas terminé, excusez-moi.
Yes, please continue if you're not finished.
OK. Donc, j'essaie de comprendre...
I'm trying to understand the extent of the statement. Does the statement say that the application of C21 on your territory will be carried out exclusively by peacekeepers and by no other police services?
Yes.
Et s'il y a des parties...
And if there are parts of C21 that don't correspond to your customs, does that mean the peacekeepers won't apply C21 in its entirety?
This is one of the issues in implementation that we have, is respecting the jurisdiction of the Kahnawà peacekeepers and the enforcement that we have in our community. And that's something that we would like to work out.
Merci, Sénateur Boisvenu. Sénateur Couture.
Thank you, Senator Boisvenu. Senator Kutcher.
Very much for being with us today. My question will be somewhat different than the previous ones you've responded to, and similar to the one I posed to our earlier witness, related to suicide and firearms. We know that suicide rates are higher in Indigenous populations, specifically in men and boys, and many of them are with firearms. And I wonder if you know if any of the firearm safety training programs that are available in your community actually address the issue of suicide risk in firearms.
So I have taken the course in my own community. We did address it at a certain extent, but for the most part, it was a basic firearm safety course where you don't store your firearm with the bullets in the same case and what have you. But in Kahnawà, we do have what we call KSES, it's Kahnawà Sagudiat Agenhas Community Services, and they do suicide prevention programs. We have programs that address the root cause of suicide. So there are programs in the community that address those issues. And from my own personal experience, I've had worked on what is called the We Matter network. And I was an ambassador of hope, which addresses Indigenous youth suicide across Canada in a more positive way, although suicide is not positive to speak of, but in a more positive way where we encourage the use of culture, the use of family, the use of hope, those kinds of mechanisms to try and encourage youth to really reconsider their purpose in life and what reasons they have to try and to attempt suicide. So in those teachings and in that understanding of my personal experience, I know, and it's very unfortunate to say, but I know that if someone were to attempt suicide, they will find a way, despite having firearms or access to firearms.
Your interest in your work on this topic. There are, however, specific interventions related to firearms and suicide prevention programs, but many of those programs don't have those specific components in them. And I'm just wondering, are you aware, and with all the work you've done, and it sounds fantastic, and thanks for doing that, are you aware of any suicide prevention programs that are currently available in your community that actually specifically, as a means restriction or other types of intervention, address firearm-related suicide?
Not in combination, no, but I do know that there are conversations that having firearms safely stored in homes is one of the ways that you can prevent suicide by firearms. So those conversations are had, but there are not explicit training to have that. So thank you for that idea. That is something that I will bring to our KSCS organization.
So would you be supportive of something like that if we had an observation in the bill, for example, something like that? Would that be useful for your community?
I think it would be useful for all communities, not necessarily just Indigenous communities.
Thank you so much.
Merci, Sénateur Couture.
Thank you, Senator Kutcher. Now, Senator Youssef, followed by Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Lazare, for being here. I very much appreciate, of course, your testimony and, of course, the elaboration on the specific. Like any legislation, implementation is always a critical component to its successes, and recognizing, of course, the uniqueness in how your territory is currently governed, and the self-government agreement with both the federal government and the provincial, how you do many things. I could understand some of the concerns that you're raising, that approach don't impede on the way in which your community has evolved, but equally how you apply legislation, recognize the importance of them in dealing with the challenges we face. So in regard to implementation, of course, we don't know yet what the regulations may look like, but fundamentally, I think, as I hear you loud and clear, you want to be very much engaged in that process because your territory is, as you said, is important for you to have a clear understanding because, officers, firearms officers apply the law very differently from coast to coast and may have a detrimental impact that you're trying to avoid. So if we were to, I guess, in the context of implementation and the regulations, the government would certainly need, the federal government would need to consult very broadly with you to appreciate some of the concerns you would like to be addressed, especially when it comes to the derogation clause, of how that should apply in regard to your territory. Am I right in assuming these are the points that you're making in a very clear, defined way?
Yes.
There's also one issue that has been highlighted in the bill and hasn't come up yet, but I want to raise it to maybe get your perspective. As you know, domestic violence is a very serious matter, not just in your community, but right across the country. And in the bill, there is a provision for red flag and yellow flag provisions to apply. Of course, red flag provision currently exists for, law enforcement officers to do their duty in regard to dealing with domestic violence, and violence against women is something that we obviously want to do. Is there any concern that you may have in regard to how domestic violence is dealt with in your community, and more importantly, especially when it comes to red flag or yellow flag laws?
Okay, so that's I guess a twofold question. The way that domestic violence is taken care of is by the Kahnawà's peacekeepers. They are the enforcement in and around Kahnawà. And they do have training for domestic violence. They have a specialized task force that addresses domestic violence cases and situations. So I feel like their training is adequate. I feel like their ability to address those situations is adequate. In terms of red flag and yellow flag provisions, I understand that we do have concerns regarding the anonymous tip kind of approach where this could be a potential for racial discrimination.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Senator Youssef. Senator.
Thank you, Senator Youssef. Senator Cardoso, followed by Senator Dasco.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Chief Lazare, thank you very much for being here and for explaining the issue, the concerns you have about this, which are certainly complex and worth a lot of consideration by us. I just wanted to look at where we go from here. So I see that you note that the reference to Section 35 of the Constitution and Section 72 of the bill is there, and you say maybe it wasn't even necessary since it does apply all the same. And you note that UNDRIP should apply to this bill, as it now is to apply to all bills passed by Parliament. Is there where we can take those two aspects and be more specific in a carve-out in the regulations that will be the next step of this whole process?
I think that there definitely is a way to create a carve-out, but we would have to have consultation to find out what that carve-out looks like. Further consultation.
Tell me about what you'd like to see as a consultation. How would that be? Who would that be with?
So we do have a consultation committee that discusses different projects happening in the community. A majority of it does have to do with development projects, but we do have the means to consult on different land issues, on different rights issues. So we would set up a meeting initially with our consultation committee and our team, and discuss how we could approach that, because I'm one person from the Mohawk Council of Kahnawà, and I don't do things unilaterally. I do things with a team. I do things with my council and making sure that they're backing me. So we would have to have that initial conversation.
Okay, this is very helpful because the way I understand it, I'm not sure, but the way I understand is that if this bill passes, then the department in charge, Public Security, PSPC, would then be in charge of developing the regulations. And what I think we can consider doing is to be fairly specific in what we suggest to them about how to go about those consultations, recognizing that they didn't take place earlier on when we were developing when the government was developing the act. Would that be the way to go?
Yes, that would be the way to go, is to set up an initial meeting, and it would have to consist of a plan, an actual for meaningful engagement. You have to have a plan to make sure that you cover all sectors and all needs of both parties, right? So in order to do that, we need to have that initial meeting.
And how would you suggest doing the consultations with other First Nations as well, or with the AFN?
I would suggest setting up a meeting with
Sorry?
the leaders of the AFN. I would suggest setting up a meeting with the leaders of the AFN and do consultation that way as well.
Okay, as distinct from the negotiations with the Kahnawà Nation.
Yes.
Yeah, and can you tell me a little more about the role of the Kahnawà peacekeepers? Are they similar to a police force in an urban setting?
Yes.
Merci, Senator Cardozo.
Thank
Merci
you.
beaucoup.
Thank you, Senator Cardozo. And now Senator Dasco has the floor.
And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My question is very similar to the one asked by Senator Youssef with respect to the red flag and yellow flag provisions in C21. I won't go over exactly the same territory that he asked, but I would like to probe a little deeper into the way your community deals with enforcement around domestic violence with respect specifically to firearms in your community. Do your enforcement officials confiscate guns from in situations where there's been domestic violence or threats with firearms? So is there anything in your procedures and in your enforcement that specifically speaks to the issue of the use of firearms and the threat of firearms in domestic violence situations?
Yes.
Thank you.
As simply put, yes. There are procedures, there are ways of not prohibiting. There are ways of seizing the firearms and de-escalating the situation. That's part of it, right? So they have a full-out procedure from the task force, and they implement it as best as they can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's part of the program that your community has. The
Yes.
practices and policies involves confiscation, and would it involve sanctions as well to the perpetrators? Is that part of what the community does with respect to guns in the situation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, and I just, if you wouldn't mind elaborating just a little bit, and again, a follow-up on what Senator Youssef asked you about what is the concern you have with respect to the red flag provisions in C21? Could you just elaborate that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so I did mention my concerns were with racial discrimination. And in my letter, I also did agree with the Canadian Bar Association regarding the clear potential for fraudulent and discriminatory application.
Could you describe that just a little more? Like who, if the complaint is coming from a family member, Is that a concern?
I won't get into specifics, but in general, the complaints, no matter where they come from, my concerns remain as they are. They could be fraudulent, they could be discriminatory in nature. Because family members do have disputes, as you probably would know. So whether or not they could be based on something factual is something that I have concerns about in terms of having fraudulent accusations.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's from a family member, you would be concerned about that?
Yes.
Yes. Oh. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Sénatrice.
Thank you, Senator Dusko. Before concluding our second panel, I would like to ask two questions of Chief Lazare. And following up to the question of Senator Boisvenu, you've clearly stated that it's not up to the Canadian government to decide on what type of weapons your members of the community can possess. But did I understand you to say that the members of the community are claiming the right to travel anywhere in Canada with weapons that municipal police forces or RCMP or provincial forces could not arrest them for illegal possession of a firearm?
No.
Alors, la réponse est assez courte, mais alors.
So it's a very short answer. You're saying that the members of your community could travel anywhere in Canada with illegal weapons. That's your answer, and I appreciate your honesty. Second question, can you tell us what proportion of people in your community are owners of firearms, and are there some in every house in Kahnawà?
I cannot say that there are firearms in every single house. I myself do not have a firearm in my own house, so definitely not in every household. As the proportion, I know that there are quite a number of Kahnawà people who do use firearms for harvesting purposes, for sustenance of their families. As we move from buying from grocery store meats to a more cultural appropriate way of feeding ourselves.
Alors, merci. Ceci nous...
Thank you. This brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you, Chief Lazare. Thank you, Ms. Spillane. And thank you all of our witnesses today for having taken the time to be with us. Your insight and your knowledge are greatly appreciated. So for my colleagues, our next meeting will take place on Monday, November 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time in room C128. And that being said, I wish you all a good day.